All right, well, I guess we're going to start. There's supposed to be more people, but it's noon already, so they're late. Anyway, so it's this talk today. Why is ransomware still a thing? And I'm Karen. I teach over at... Sorry, I know that phone's going to screw around. I got to turn that down. Sorry. Come on, come on. There we go. Hopefully that'll work. All right. So I teach over at the Jarvis College of Computing and Digital Media. I teach computer programming and various other sundry parts of technology, including cybersecurity. So today I'm going to talk about the current status of what's going on with ransomware, because it turns out there's just some underlying technological problem. It's just not being addressed. And actually, that's the real reason for ransomware. And I'll come to some conclusions about that. But I'm going to explain that in my own work. You know, it's research that we're turning into product. So, all right. So oh, by the way, if you have any questions or comments, don't hold them to the end. Just go ahead and raise your hand or ask the talk or something. That way, you know, we can interact. I'm perfectly fine with that. All right. Yay. So, okay. As a general rule, technology improves with time. Sorry, this is the first time I've ever given this presentation, so it's not committed to memory. Did you stop already with the phone? Okay. And as a general rule, technology improves with time. And I mean technology in general. Technology to save lives, improve living conditions, make your hair glow in the dark. But computing technology also gets better. There's more memory, faster networks, a wider assortment of software, AI, and of course, new types of computer attacks. Computing technology seems to be one of the few areas where humans spend considerable effort trying to reverse the progress of others. Perhaps the most painful of these efforts is ransomware, which holds your computers and data hostage. You probably are aware of at least some of the harms of ransomware. It's not just the financial cost to businesses, although that is still very substantial. According to an estimate by the Swiss technology company Acronis, technology damages from ransomware are expected to exceed $30 billion this year. In a survey of IT and cybersecurity leaders in 14 countries conducted by Sophos in early 2023, 66% of respondents said their organization had been hit by a ransomware attack in the previous year. For businesses that paid a ransom, the average cost was just over $1.5 million. And regardless of whether they paid the ransomware or not, the average cost just to recover from an attack was at $1.82 million. 84% of private sector organizations that were hit by ransomware said the attack had caused them to lose revenue because of lost business opportunities. And it's not just the big players who are getting hurt. 82% of ransomware attacks target small businesses, according to ransomware experts Coveware. Ransomware also takes a toll in lost jobs. According to a study by Cyber Reason from 2022, nearly 40% of organizations wound up laying off staff as a result of the costs of a ransomware attack. And talk about job stress, 45%, nearly half of cybersecurity professionals have considered quitting their jobs because of the constant threat of ransomware attacks. according to a report by the cybersecurity firm Deep Instinct. This at a time when businesses are already struggling with a shortage of skilled IT professionals. The last thing we need to have is smart techies running for the exits. But the stakes are even higher than that, because in some cases, ransomware attacks are actually life-threatening. Yes, people have literally died and otherwise been harmed because of ransomware attacks on hospitals and other healthcare organizations. A few examples. A 2021 study from Proofpoint and the Ponemon Institute, which surveyed more than 600 healthcare facilities, found that mortality rates increased at a quarter of the facilities following a ransomware attack. Some specific examples. In 2020, a ransomware attack forced a hospital in Dusseldorf, Germany, to close its emergency department, and a patient died in an ambulance while being rerouted to another hospital. In 2020, a woman sued an Alabama hospital after the death of her newborn baby, alleging that doctors failed to carry out critical pre-birth testing due to a cyber attack on the hospital, which meant the baby was born with the cord around its neck. This led to brain damage and a few months later the baby's death, she argued. This has led the cybersecurity advisor for the American Hospital Association to say that in cases like these, ransomware crimes are not just financial crimes, but threat to life crimes. And the situation is clearly out of control. Considering the impact of all this, and given that other advances in technology are so profound, how come no one has succeeded in finding a way to put an end to malware? You guys know what ChatGPT is? The AI engine? Oh yeah, the savior of humanity. Well, ChatGPT, I have a question. How do you stop ransomware completely? Huh, real smart engine, huh? Well, I'm going to briefly discuss why I think ransomware still exists. And then I'm going to tell you about the work I've been doing for the past year to put a stake through its heart. At the end of the presentation, I will leave you with an important question instead of a profound conclusion. So, a year ago, I gave this presentation, The 6 Central Flaws of Computing. There was a fair amount of technical detail. I'm not going to bother you with a lot of those details today. Although I am going to go through a little bit of technical detail. You're going to have to learn a little bit about computing, just a little bit, so you can understand the problem and the solution. But I'm going to simply assert today 3 things. First, A, computer software is fundamentally flawed. B, malware, including ransomware, and ransomware is just a type of malware, depends on these flaws to perform its evil deeds. C, the computing industry has strong financial incentives to maintain the status quo rather than overhaul its vulnerable systems. I'm sure as future lawyers that should make you perk up. Of course, seeing is believing. So I'm going to show you exactly how the problem occurs and how my work over the past year provides a rough blueprint for eliminating malware. All of it in one fell swoop. Believe it or not. To explain these things, I have to first give you just a little bit of background on different types of computers. So that's our first little technical discussion. There'll be 2. The computers you have at work and at home are known as desktop computers. They usually run one of 2 operating systems, Microsoft Windows or Mac OS. If you're an ultra geek like me, you may have a desktop computer that runs on an alternative operating system, Linux. And I generally use a version known as Linux Mint. Nonetheless, these computers share a lot in common. They have graphical user interfaces, meaning they display shapes and colors on the screen for you to click on using the mouse or this clicker, right? And they permit you to easily install new programs and launch them with a click or a double click. Websites, on the other hand, do not run on desktop computers. They require special computers that can serve lots of users, many at the same time. Think about how many people are accessing the Google website at the same time to perform a wide variety of searches. These special computers are known as servers. The data on a server belongs to the organization that provisions the server. And physically, the server may reside in a computer room at the organization's offices. That's pretty much how it used to be. But nowadays, companies often rent servers that are maintained by technology companies. In fact, companies often share space on the same server computer by renting a virtual machine, or VM, that runs on the server computer. To be specific, the server computer runs lots of VMs at the same time. And this practice is known as cloud computing, a term I'm sure you've all heard many times. Now, Microsoft makes a version of Windows for servers, and it's very cleverly named Windows Server. Apple used to make a dedicated server software, but no longer does so. And you might be surprised to learn that the other major operating system used for servers is Linux. Linux can be difficult to use as a desktop system, but it's great for servers. The files on servers contain the data for the organization. It's often the crown jewels. For example, a hospital needs to maintain lots of patient data, and doctors, nurses, and other hospital personnel, including the billing department, need access to this data. Typically, programmers will create a program that permits hospital data to log in and access the data on the server, often using a web browser. The same is true of other businesses. Insurance companies need to maintain lots of data, and lots of agents and other personnel need to access it. The same is true for manufacturers, who often give access to their suppliers and distributors. The truth is that attackers aren't after you and your desktop computer. You're much too small a fish for their appetite. They're after servers. Imagine what happens when an attacker succeeds in taking this data hostage by encryption. Doctors can't access vital patient data. Financial companies have to stop their activity. Even manufacturing operations are halted. The bottom line is that data is a highly valuable commodity that people will pay a ransom for. Often those ransoms amount to millions of dollars, as I just noted. It's more lucrative than robbing a bank, and the robbers don't even have to put on a gorilla mask. They can do it while sipping a cup of coffee at their desk. And the way to this data is through the server, which in this analogy is like a bank vault full of gold bars. So the question becomes, what can be done to protect servers? Well, for the past year, I've worked on modifying Linux to implement a more robust form of security. Let's take a look at this new system. It's known as HeartSuite. I didn't name it. So that you can see what exactly it protects and how my form of security stops malware. We're going to have to get in a little bit of details. That's the second technical discussion. And why its approach is fundamentally different from other security software. All right, so most security software these days focus on detecting threats and then trying to address them. But you know what's even better than threat detection? Eliminating threats by making them irrelevant. Instead of trying to detect and isolate malware after the fact, like our competition does, we redesigned the Linux server from the ground up to make it completely secure by preventing attacks before they have a chance to get off the ground. And we're essentially changing the rules of the game. So how does this work? Well, the core of HeartSuite is based on restricting access to applications, meaning programs, files, and network connections. The predominant feature of HeartSuite, and so this is the approach that really sets us apart, is the use of what we call application permission orders, or APOs. An APO is a collection of orders that provides access to various files, directories, and network connections. HeartSuite includes programs and scripts for easily creating and modifying APO records as needed. And in particular, HeartSuite demands that a program have an APO record before it allows the program to run. If there's no APO record, HeartSuite stops it dead in its tracks. And we never get him to, sorry. Thought I had that sound off. Apologize. So if there's no record, HeartSuite stops it dead in its tracks. And once an APO record is created for a program, HeartSuite then demands permission orders to allow that program to access files and network connections. When the required permission is absent, HeartSuite logs an error message. So I realize it's a fair amount of detail. It's probably a bit overwhelming. So I'm going to try to explain this in a little bit simpler way, right? And probably the best way to explain that is to explain how an APO record is constructed and used. And to do that, we need to start with the log messages. So let's talk about a common server program as the example. So there's a web server program that's very commonly used on Linux. It's called Apache Web Server. And for those who don't know, a web server is the program that sends you web pages, right? So when you type the name of a website in your browser or you click on a link, the browser sends a message over the internet to the corresponding web server program, informing it about the particular web page that you want. The web server program, or simply web server, then transmits the web page back across the internet to your browser. That's how it works. It's actually a fairly simple system. Because thousands of people may be asking for web pages from the same web server every second, you can understand why web servers need to be placed on powerful computers, server computers. So let's take a look at an example of what happens after the Apache program is installed on Linux. All right. To start this program, you run it with a command. So this is a command based on Linux, or it's a form of Unix. It's going to be different from what you've seen. We do things with the command line, meaning a little window shows up and we actually type text instead of just clicking on things. All right, so the text we're going to type is this: /user/sbin/apache2. Now, let me see, can I do this? Not well, but okay. Here. So slash means here's a directory, and the name of that directory is user. It's old-fashioned Linux. And within that directory is another directory, system binaries, meaning programs. And here is the actual name of the Apache program that runs, Apache 2. So we go into user directory, and within it, the sbin system binaries directory. And we tell the computer, please run Apache 2. That starts the Apache 2 server program on a Linux server computer. And now users can, right, send messages, right? By clicking on something or typing, right, the name for that particular one, for that particular server computer. And that'll tell it which web page you want, and it sends it back. Okay, so when this happens, though, at first, HeartSuite recognizes that there's no APO record for an Apache 2 program, so it generates an error message in the HeartSuite log. HeartSuite keeps a log of all the things that happen, things that go wrong, right? So it puts in a message, hard suite error, no permitted orders record, and the name of the program. Someone's trying to run this program and, hey boss, no APO record. So a person with administrative privileges, known as a sysadmin, then runs a simple script, which we supply with HardSuite, to find messages like this in the log file and uses them to construct an APO record for this program, right? Because we do want to run this, so we do want an APO record, so we're going to create one. And after that, that error message will no longer appear in the log because now we have an APO record. It's not a problem. However, HardSuite will then start logging every file access as an error because the APO record still lacks file access permissions. So, for example, we now run the Apache 2 program. We don't get an error message about no APO record because it has one. But instead, we get these error messages, right? No file access, program, /user/sbin/Apache 2. Oh, that's the program trying to access a file. What file? Oh, well, here you go. This doesn't do that. Okay. It's going to the process directory, the system subdirectory, the kernel subdirectory, and the ngroups_max file. All right, that's all gobbledygook, I get that, right? But it's important for the computer program because it needs some kind of data to do its job. So it's trying to access that file. It's trying to access this file, this boot ID file. It's trying to access this overcommit memory file. It's trying to access a whole bunch. I only copied 3 of these messages just so you can see. A whole lot of messages occur because it turns out computer programs behind the scenes access all kinds of files on your computer, and you have no idea this is going on. But it does. And we need to know this because we need to know whether this kind of access should be permitted. In this case, though, we can see, yeah, this is general stuff. It has to do this to run. And it's not hitting your files or anything, or user files. It's hitting some system files that you would expect it to do. In addition to those messages were about files that Apache was trying to read. It's just to access the file and see what's in the file, read it. But if Apache 2 is trying to write to a file, meaning change that file and modify it, then we get a slightly different message. No file write access. And here's a file that Apache is trying to write to. And, I'm supposed to use this, I keep forgetting, right? Right here. So in this various subdirectory, there's a file called log, and it wants to write something, modify that file, put some data in that file. That difference is really, really important. Reading a file doesn't change it, doesn't modify it, doesn't harm it. Of course, if it's private data, that data could go over a network connection, right? So information could be stolen. But stealing information is a different attack from destroying information, right? Okay. So reading doesn't destroy anything. We want to be careful with it, but it doesn't destroy anything. Writing, you can change a file. And what you could do is you could take that file and you can run an encryption program and take all of the information in there and encrypt it so that now it's unusable. You need a decryption key. And the people who encrypted your files will sell you the encryption key. And that is known as a ransomware attack. That's how they work. It's that simple. All ransomware attacks work the same way. They find the files that belong to you that contain really important information, patient data records, financial records for your insurance company, manufacturing records, everything. And they take all the little bits in the file and they encrypt them with an encryption program. And now to you, it's this gobbledygook. And they know the key that they used for your computer, and they'll sell you that key for $1 million. Oh yes, that's how it works. Devious, isn't it? And it's so simple. But why is this possible? Well, because I just created this technology. It didn't exist before. No one has been checking this. No one. Programs have free reign today on your computer, on every server computer. They open access whatever the file they want. Big problem. Big problem. Free access. Why? Because programmers like it that way. It makes their job a lot easier to write programs. You're going to write a program with free access, hand it off to a computer, and now let attackers do the same thing? Well, there's your ransomware. That's why it's happening. All right, so we get this error message, and again, we say, well, we do want to give Apache permission to write to this file. So we run the script. Again, the script's used to find these errors and add permission orders. Depending on the file being accessed, the script will add either permission to access the file specified or a directory that contains the file. And I should note that many people call directories folders. It's the exact same thing. It's just a different name. All right. At times, this directory will be a parent directory of the actual directory that contains the file. Directory access is added instead of file access when the script detects that the file being accessed is likely temporary. That happens too. We have a lot of temporary files. So in order for this system to work, we give access to the directory itself, not just to the file. Right? Because if it's temporary, the name will change the next time it's run. That's the problem. The name keeps changing, well, the permissions will be wrong, right? Okay. So to be precise though, the script actually doesn't manage the APO records. It calls a program supplied with HeartSuite, and this program is called HS App Perm Orders Manager, right? A HeartSuite Application Permission Orders Manager program, right? And that performs the actual work. And you can use this program directly. You can view the current set of the APO records, all of it, or you can use it to manage records, right? You can modify them yourself. So let's look at the default record. So that first message, no APO record, right? The script finds it, adds a default record. What's in the default record? Well, here's the default record for Apache. So note this trailing D. This means that this is a directory, not a file name. Okay. And the number at the beginning, keep wanting to do that, don't I? The number at the beginning, all right, that's just identifies if this is APO record number 225. Just for numbering purposes. It's important, it simplifies administration. All right, so there's not much in the default record, right? As I mentioned before. It's just minimal access. That's why all those log messages appear once you actually run it. But if you keep running it for a while, you get to see everything it's really doing. And that's what we want to see. And then we keep running the script saying, man, go get those log messages and add the correct permissions so Apache can do its thing, right? We're doing this on a computer in our office before we connect it to the internet, right? Before the attackers can get to it. We're just setting it up. So once we do this, we end up with a complete APO record. This is a complete record of what Apache is going to do. Okay. All right, so here's the permitted directories and files. And you can see here's a bunch of files that it wants to read. And, well, we have the W before these, so these are the files and directories it needs to write to. Here's a, oh, actually log is a directory. I didn't realize that. Okay. It actually, technically, it could be either, but that's a different story. Anyway, so it's, being allowed to write to a directory or to write to a file. All right. And then, oops. I had this in the wrong place. All right, and it also adds network locations. So these are IP addresses. These are real simplistic ones. There's other records. I should have brought one where you can see all kinds of things. But the whole point here is you're going to specify what kind of connections over the network Apache can make. Right? Okay. And this is all done also by the log and the script adding it. Prepare your record. All right. So, because the permissions needed by a program must be discovered through this error logging process, you must first start using HeartSuite in what we call monitor mode. It's a learning or training process. So in monitor mode, HeartSuite logs all these permission errors I've just discussed and nothing else. To be clear, HeartSuite does not prevent a program from running or accessing files and network connections while in monitor mode. We want it to do its thing, but we get to see what it's doing. So the purpose really is just to simply quickly learn what permissions are needed and build in an appropriate APO record. Of course, it's also a nifty tool if you're just interested in learning what a program does and what it accesses. But once the APO database has been built as desired, the next step is to switch HeartSuite to denial mode. And that's exactly what it sounds like. In denial mode, HeartSuite prevents a program from running if it has no APO record. Perhaps even more importantly, while in denial mode, HeartSuite prevents programs from accessing files and network location connections that are not included in the program's APO record. And in my estimation, this approach is how computer security should work by default, everywhere. Activities of programs must be restrained to that which the user expects and nothing more. The only reason that malware, including ransomware, is possible at all is that programs are given free rein in current systems. The bottom line is that current operating systems allow programs to read and write any files they want, while in contrast, HeartSuite restricts the files that programs can access, thereby preventing programs from doing anything they want. And that is the difference. So, imagine bringing home a puppy and leaving it alone in your house with no supervision, no training, and no pet gates. Will you really be shocked if you come home to find pillow stuffing everywhere? And puppies aren't even trying to ruin your day like ransomware attackers are. A couple side notes. So, some of you might be aware that there are certain programs that are used primarily to interpret other code, such as Python and Java. I don't know if you've heard of those. We have accounted for such programs in HeartSuite too. Specifically, we have added what we call shim programs that allow the user to create APO records for the code that is interpreted. For example, we include a shim program for Python that will permit you to create an APO record for a specific Python script rather than having to rely on a single APO record for Python itself, the program, which would necessitate including permission orders for all of the Python scripts that you run. Some of you might be wondering, well, why can't attackers simply add an APO record for their ransomware? Good question. The answer is an additional feature we have to include to prevent that from happening, and that's called lockdown. So once HeartSuite is started in denial mode, you can then engage lockdown, which prevents any changes to the APO database. So that means lockdown protects the integrity of the APO records during denial mode. Lockdown is engaged with a simple command, which we recommend including in the HeartSuite startup script so that your server is automatically locked down as soon as it boots up. By design, there's no command to disengage lockdown. It's turned off only by rebooting your computer. But what happens if you've included the lockdown command in your startup script? Won't your server continuously reboot to lockdown? Yes, which will stop you as well as the attackers from making any changes whatsoever to your server. At some point, you will need to disengage lockdown so that you can perform server maintenance, meaning you might add some new programs or some files, make changes, updates, right? So to turn off lockdown, when it's included in your startup script, you'll need to boot to the prior Linux version. And here it's important to note that installing HeartSuite merely adds the HeartSuite version of Linux. The installation routine leaves the prior version in place. What is key, however, is that booting to the prior Linux version, still on your computer, requires physical access to your computer or something called serial port access. And if your server is in the cloud, you're not going to have physical access. Goodness knows where that server is. But you will have serial port access because all cloud providers provide what's called serial port access. But this means that the requirement of physical or serial port access prevents attackers from simply rebooting to the prior Linux version. They can't do it. They don't have that access. And that's how we stop them from adding their own records or modifying their current records. All right, so HeartSuite provides a somewhat crude yet effective way to rein in the excesses of current computer programming. Because no new programs can be run during lockdown, no malware can be run, including ransomware. Which means that a server running HeartSuite Linux is simply not vulnerable to such attacks. HeartSuite effectively puts that bank vault we were talking about beyond the reach of attackers. Nevertheless, it is possible for a sysadmin to be fooled into installing what we call a Trojan virus, meaning malware that is masquerading as legitimate software. Because the administrator will give that program the necessary permissions to run, it is possible for the program to wreak havoc on the files it is permitted to access. At that point, your only salvation is your file backup. And that is precisely why the first files that attackers routinely attack today are your backups. So, we know that. We added a solution. We solved this problem with an automatic backup feature, which walls off your backup with extra protection. If the HeartSuite automatic backup feature is set up to back up your data files that the program can access, HeartSuite will make copies of those files before the malware destroys them. More importantly, only HeartSuite can access the backups. Malware can't. In fact, even legitimate programs can't access the backup. We've created it so that only HeartSuite can access it. But we've walled off that attack as well. By means of this simple but powerful approach, HeartSuite prevents all programs from destroying or modifying backup files. And the HeartSuite version manager can then be used to retrieve any version of the file at will. All right. So, all of that means that if your staff downloads malware masquerading as legitimate software by mistake, the layers of application permission orders, lockdown, and versioning will work together to minimize damage and easily let you restore your files. So if you want bulletproof backup protection, you should use HeartSuite. And we are definitely at the beginning of our journey to publicize our software. I think personally, because I'm a researcher, it's more important to demonstrate, yes, you can do this, you can include this in a system without destroying the ability of programmers to write their code, and it works. We have a server right now, it's called our flag server, where we actually put up a web page and we invite attackers, we give them complete access. Please attack the server. Take down our web page, or at least modify it. No one has succeeded yet. We don't know how the computing industry is going to react, but there's a few things we do know. So first, others can implement their own versions of HeartSuite. Once we show them this, they can do that themselves, actually. just as long as they don't infringe on our IP. We do have some IP in this. If they agree with this type of protection, others will enter the market, and the result will ultimately be an improvement in computer security. Second, if we're lucky, well, we'll attract customers and help them improve their computer security. And if we're sufficiently successful, the computer industry will eventually take notice. And third, if we intend to continue, we do intend to continue with our development and create a hard suite file system. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all the principles and the mechanisms that we employ, and we're going to embed them in what we call the file system. File system is, well, you see in your computers, if you're in Windows, you go to Explorer and you can look at your files. That's all generated for you by use of some software called a file system. When you're on the Mac, it's the Finder tool. You go into Finder and you see all these files, right? It's the same thing, it's a file system. And if we embed this approach in the file system, it will offer complete protection against malware without any of this need for this manual configuration. No more need for figuring out APO records and scripts. That's all gone. It's all automatic behind the scenes. So there can be no introduction of human error at that point. Perfect. Frankly, the HeartSuite file system is the sophisticated product that we truly wish to bring to the market. The other thing is, too, is I modified a version of Linux. It does you no good if you're on Windows, right? Or even the Mac. But if we embed it in a file system, that can be brought to desktop computers as well as Windows Server computers. And of course, we would be ecstatic to license our technology for the file system. But of course, adoption of our approaches will inevitably lead to the computer industry making those changes that I have stressed so necessary to computer security. And that effort will cost the industry a fair amount of money in labor costs without providing them with any new source of revenues or higher prices for existing products. And that might sound like a real tough sell. But there is a possibility. So, a new wrinkle in the story. So decades ago, automobile accidents were quite often deadly. Your first years, but you're taking torts. Don't know if you've gotten a product liability yet. You're halfway through, maybe second half, okay. Well, decades ago, the automobile accidents were quite deadly or often left their victims maimed for life. Eventually, a personal injury lawyer decided to specialize in suing automobile manufacturers, alleging that their products were unreasonably dangerous. And consequently, the manufacturers were subject to product liability laws. This lawyer was very successful, and he wrote a book about his experiences called Unsafe at Any Speed. His name? Ralph Nader. That's how Mr. Nader got his start. And I'm sure most of you heard of it. Well, it's true that computers involve different circumstances than cars. But we've already discussed some examples of how ransomware attacks on hospitals can threaten people's lives, right? While attacks on other kinds of businesses can destroy people's livelihoods. So maybe the stakes are high enough to put change in the driver's seat when the right solution is made available. And maybe litigation has a role to play here as well. My wish would be for some enterprising new attorneys to develop a specialty in suing software developers for publishing software that they know will permit malware attacks, taking into account the serious harms those attacks can cause and the lack of necessary safety features provided. If such lawsuits began to succeed, the industry would be forced to change. So, as I told you at the beginning, I'm going to leave you with a question. Given the current landscape and the possibilities of the future, what will the computing industry do? You know what? Scratch that. I have a better question. What will you do? Questions, comments? Yes.
How often, maybe I missed this one at the beginning, but how often are ransomwares prosecuted, found?
Well, you know, they have successfully rounded up some groups that perpetrate ransomware. It's hard to prove who perpetrated which attack. That's another one of the problems with the legal proofs. But they have found them in possession of the Bitcoin, you know, from those wallets, and so they can get them on that kind of evidence. So they do that sometimes. Sadly, though, it's still a drop in the bucket. There is more and more work on finding people, you know, using network IP addresses to figure out where it's coming from, and then go investigate locally until they can find people, you know, banks and Bitcoin and things like that. But I hate to say it, even that approach is still a drop in the bucket.
Is there any particular region where most of the ransomwares come from or claim to come from?
Well, you know, that's another good question. Let's leave nation states out of it for a second, because nation states are actually a source of some of it, but typically not ransomware as much as other types of cyber attacks. But leaving them out, for whatever reason, the evidence tends to point a lot to Eastern Europe. Yeah. Is that really where most of it's coming from? Or is that where it's, you know, not being hidden as well? Don't know, right? That's the next question.
Obviously, healthcare is big, but what are some other sectors that are especially plagued by this?
Well, I mentioned the financial sector. You know, they do go after the financial sector a lot. I think, you know, banks themselves have a large target on their back. And if someone could actually really hobble the bank, you know they could get a lot of money, or they believe they could. So they're constantly being attacked. Even insurance companies, because insurance companies handle a lot of money as well.
How can you get HeartSuite?
Oh, well, you can go to the website, the heartsecsuite.com. Well,
Yeah,
I don't know if I can type it up there real quick. I forgot. So go to the website. Ah. It's actually a hard sex suite. Sorry. But that's right. There's a second and so it's in security suite. Oh. There you go. Heart sex suite. So HERT like the heart, SEC sec as in security, then suite.com. And there's all kinds of information on there. It's free download. You can actually download it, and you can install it on any compatible Linux distro distribution. And there's some little details about that, but you can do it, and you can play with it in monitor mode all you want. You just need a license to run it in denial mode.
Even just for Linux, do you have anything for Windows or Mac or?
No, this was based on actually me coding to modify the Linux kernel directly. So that's why it's not available for any other platform. But as I said, this is our really first product. It's a bit crude, right? But does the job, number one, and more importantly, really serves as a proof of concept. Hey guys, this is the road we need to go down. We need to start regulating file access and network connection access and stop, you know, allowing programmers to live in the wild, wild west, which is what's going on still today, right? And then we can develop the file system approach, right? Which will cure all that and be something we could then port to Windows and the Mac and any other platform.
Do you going back to the industries and the sectors, is this just going back to like how this works, is it truly one size fits all approach for every sector if you want to do a ransomware, or do you kind of tailor your approach towards the sector you're trying to invade?
Well, it's not so much the sector as the type of data. And so, in one sector, like the financial sector, they're going after basically, some of the financial records, particularly of the customers, right? And so, you go after the medical sector, well, it's hard to really get that, and it's not going to give you much. It's obviously billing for just small procedures. So really what you're after is the patient data itself for two reasons. Number one, you can then ransom it. Number two, it turns out, well, if you know the patient data, you know enough about the patient that you can use that information to impersonate them. So it's used for identity theft.
Do ransomwares generally go after big organizations, or do they go after the individuals whose data they stole? Like,
Yeah.
like you mentioned, you get the medical information. You can either go after the hospital with all of this, or you can go after the individual whose data you have. Do ransomware people tend to go after both, or do they tend to go after one?
Well, different ransomware groups have different focuses, but there is a, kind of a hierarchy of people who perform these attacks, I hate to say, but it's true. So some go after more top, like all the patient data so they can get a big hit on a hospital itself. Others are after the individual data so they can then sell it off in pieces for these kinds of other attacks like identity theft. So the truth is there are different attackers, they have different approaches and different objectives, and they're all there at once. But ultimately what they're doing is they're still taking advantage of what I call a central flaw in computing, and that is the complete lack of control over access on a computer by the programs that run on a computer.
Why do you think there hasn't been more to kind of close these gaps?
People have done things that are similar in some certain ways over time. Unfortunately, anytime they even tried going down this road a little bit, just was never adopted by industry for one objective or another. And like I said, I gave that presentation last year. I gave it to a bunch of techies as well. I've given the presentation a couple times. And the techies hated it, the 6 central flaws. They said, well, okay, there are problems with what we do, but we need the ability to innovate. So we can't have all this regulation. We need to be able to be free to do whatever we please. I said, but look what you're doing to the computers because of that. You can still innovate with some structure to this, right? Some restrictions. They didn't agree. That's the end of it. Then that was the end of that presentation. They just thought I was nuts.
So do you see this more as an industry thing that we need to solve, or do you think it would be better handled legislatively?
Well, that's why I mentioned the lawsuits. I think law is the area where we're going to eventually have to go. Yes?
But in regard to that, it seems like there's not much traction in the Hill. I mean, any efforts are being, like the defense around net neutrality or platform saying we're just providing a platform. If criminal activity happens on there, it's not on us. But once you set foot in anywhere in Europe, you suddenly see all these extra protective measures on your phone, even just on your phone. It's like, oh, it works here, why can't it work in the US? So what can you say about that? Like the whole...
Yeah, I do agree that internationally they feel differently than the industry in the United States. That is true. It's quite clearly true. We're still dominant in the computer industry, for better or worse, frankly. And I think that's the problem. Our computing industry doesn't want to listen. Our computing industry, I mean, these companies, Google and Microsoft and Apple and IBM and all of them, they're making billions and billions and billions of dollars investing in systems with current infrastructure today, right? It's highly vulnerable to a variety of attacks. They're making billions of dollars with crappy software, to be blunt. What's their incentive to improve the software? They're not going to make any more money, and they will spend time fixing it. So it's going to be a cost to them. Maybe not a great cost. It'll be a substantial cost, but in comparison to their profits, it's tiny, isn't it? But they see, well, there is some cost. What are we going to get back for that particular cost? Nothing? No, you won't get anything back. You just make the world a better place so that hospitals don't get attacked. That's what's going to happen. And for them, that's just not good enough. So frankly, in a situation like that, I just don't see it changing. The automobile manufacturers made really bad products that kill people and maim them for life. You should go back and look at the record. It was unbelievable what they used to do and get away with. And the government let them do it. There was no regulation, right? None. And then finally, some personal injury lawyer decided, you know what, we can make cars out to be, defective products. And when the judge said, you know what, that makes sense under the restatement. Judgment for the plaintiff. And that's really how the ball got rolling. Everything was a consequence of that. Seriously. I mean, it's night and day different. I remember riding around my grandma's old rumbly car, my sister, and we were just in the back seat, just bouncing up and down. No safety features, no safety belts even, nothing. And we just thought it was like an amusement park to go in, her car and like, oh yeah, let's go somewhere, because, it's like a ride, But we're little kids, what do we know? If we had done an accident, well, that would have been the end of that. So I'm old enough to still remember when safety belts became a thing of discussion. We should wear safety belts. We should wear safety belts. That was how it was back then. People didn't even think of, what is this thing? Get it out of here. They didn't even understand what the feature was. It was crazy. So the only way that changed was because of the legal system. And I fear that we're in the same predicament. So at least now I can provide product, I can show that it works. We could then have test cases and have people actually protected and say, oh, well now you can get protection. So what's your excuse for not getting protection, right? Is that becoming a duty if you know there's a way to protect and you ignored it? Sounds like a legal matter.
Again, sorry if I missed this from the beginning.
No.
Do not most, but do you know if a good portion of ransomware attacks are, let's say, successful and we never hear about it because it always happens sort of behind closed doors? They don't report it, they just pay and that's done? Or is it sort of a blackmail thing where it just keeps going on and on?
Well, two things. I mean, I do believe that most ransomware attacks occur, under the radar. What I've heard from people who got attacked and reports from various companies like Verizon and the FBI is that when you get attacked and you just cave in and give them some money, right? They actually do send you the key and you spend some time and a lot of money trying to decrypt your files. It turns out it's not an easy process, but you do it and you get your stuff back. And so it works. And then 6 months later, someone else hits you and you get another attack. Completely unrelated to the first one. Just a different group of attackers out there. And it happens. And in current technology, there isn't much you can do about it.
Do you think they share information like this company's security is terrible, go after them?
Yeah, sorry. I don't know so much that they're sharing the information as they're sharing tools. There's actually a lot of tool sharing between attackers. Where they say, here's a great tool for getting into this kind of computer. And they post it on the dark web. And they exchange these things. You would think, hey man, it's making money. Why would they be giving it away free? But it turns out it's an ego thing. It's a badge of honor to post an effective attack module and say, hey, we succeeded in this attack. So you're bragging essentially. So that's why they do it, and that's why they share it, and that's why attacks have grown exponentially, because people do that. There's a firm, I can't remember their name, they said they'll give you so much money if you help them in these cyber attacks. And they tell you how you can help them. They give you a cut of the proceeds. I mean, the financial incentive's on their side, not ours. It's terrible. All right, it is one, but is there anything else?
No other questions in the chat, anything in the room? All right, well, thank you, and great talk.